Hey everybody, and welcome to our deep dive on learning English. I know some of you out there want to get better at English, so we're going to try to help you with that.
That's right.
Yeah. Today, we're going to talk about how to learn English without getting bogged down by all the grammar rules and stuff.
Exactly. It's all about finding fun and easy ways to learn.
So what's the first tip for improving your English?
Well, I would say the most important thing is to just use English every single day,
Every day, even if I'm busy.
even if you're busy. And guess what? You probably already do lots of things that can help you practice.
Really? Like what?
Well, think about it. Do you watch movies?
Yeah, sometimes.
What about listening to music or even just browsing YouTube?
Yeah, I do all of those things.
Okay, great. Now just try doing them in English. You can watch English movies, listen to English music, and find English channels on YouTube.
That sounds a lot more fun than just studying textbooks.
Exactly. It's way more fun, and it helps you learn naturally.
So if I'm watching a movie in English, should I use subtitles?
That's a good question. Subtitles can be helpful at first, especially if you're just starting out. But I would recommend trying to watch without them sometimes too,
Why is that?
because it forces you to really listen and pay attention to the sounds of English. It's like learning a new song. You might need the lyrics at first, but eventually you can sing along without them.
That makes sense.
Okay.
So besides watching movies and listening to music, what else can I do to use English every day?
Well, talking to people in English is super important.
I get really nervous talking to native speakers.
I know it can be intimidating, but even just a few minutes of conversation can make a big difference.
Okay, so we've talked about using English every day. What's the next step?
The next step is practice.
Practice makes perfect.
Right.
And
But it's not just about passive practice like reading and listening. You also need to actively practice speaking and writing.
I see. So it's not enough to just understand English. I need to actually use it.
Exactly. And don't worry, you don't need to write a novel or give a speech right away. Start small.
Small like how?
Well, for writing, you could try keeping a journal in English. Just write a little bit each day about your day or your thoughts or whatever comes to mind.
That seems manageable. What about speaking?
For speaking, you can try talking to yourself.
Talking to myself. Won't people think I'm crazy?
Haha. Well, maybe don't do it in public, but talking to yourself in English is actually a great way to practice.
I guess I could try it when I'm alone.
Exactly. And as you get more comfortable, you can start looking for opportunities to talk to other people in English.
You know, I've heard people say that it's helpful to think in English. Is that true?
Yeah, thinking in English is a fantastic way to improve your fluency.
But how do you even do that?
Well, instead of translating from your native language to English in your head, try to think directly in English.
I'm not sure I understand.
Okay, let me give you an example. Let's say you see a table. Instead of thinking table in your native language and then translating it to table in English, just think table directly in English.
So it's like making my brain switch to English mode.
Exactly. It takes some practice, but it gets easier over time.
Okay, I'll try that. So we've covered speaking and writing practice. What about listening? How can I improve my listening skills?
Just like with everything else, the key to improving your listening skills is to listen to English every single day.
I like listening to music.
Music is great, but you can also listen to podcasts, audiobooks, or even TED Talks.
I like TED Talks. They're always so interesting.
Right. And the great thing about listening to different types of content is that it exposes you to different accents and speaking styles.
So it's like training my ears to understand different kinds of English.
Exactly. And besides just listening passively, there are some fun exercises you can try to actively improve your listening skills.
Like what?
Have you ever heard of shadowing?
Shadowing. What's that?
It's basically listening to someone speaking English and trying to copy them as closely as possible.
Oh, like a parrot?
Exactly, like a parrot. It might sound silly, but it's super helpful for improving your pronunciation and rhythm.
That's a cool idea. I'll have to try that. Okay, so now we've talked about listening practice. What about learning new words?
Ah, vocabulary. That's another important part of learning English.
It feels like the hardest part.
I know it can feel overwhelming, but trust me, there are ways to make it easier.
Please tell me.
The first tip is to avoid memorizing lists of words.
But isn't that how we learn new words?
It's not the most effective way. It's much better to learn new words in context.
What do you mean by in context?
I mean, learning new words when you encounter them in real situations, like while reading a book, watching a movie, or listening to a podcast.
So if I'm watching a cooking show in English, I might learn some new cooking-related words.
Exactly. And because you're seeing or hearing those words being used naturally, you're more likely to remember them.
That makes sense. Are there any other tips for learning new words?
Well, once you learn a new word, try to use it in a sentence as soon as possible.
Why is that important?
Because using new words helps solidify them in your memory.
So it's not enough to just recognize a word, I have to actually use it.
That's right. And if you're struggling to remember new words, you can always try using flashcards or language learning apps.
I like apps. They make learning more fun. Okay, so we've talked about practicing speaking, listening, writing, and learning new words. Is there anything else I need to know?
Well, we can't forget about grammar.
Grammar.
I know a lot of people find grammar intimidating, but it's an important part of learning English.
I always get confused by all the rules.
I understand, but the good news is you don't need to become a grammar expert to speak English fluently.
Really?
Really, the most important thing is to focus on using English naturally, not on memorizing grammar rules.
So I should just try to speak and write as much as possible, even if I make mistakes.
Exactly. And as you practice, you'll start to internalize the grammar rules without even realizing it.
That's a relief. I was starting to feel overwhelmed.
And don't worry, if you do have specific grammar questions, there are lots of resources available to help you, like grammar books, websites, and even tutors.
That's good to know. So we've covered a lot of ground today. We talked about using English every day, practicing speaking, writing, and listening, learning new words, and not being afraid of grammar.
And we'll talk more about how to stay motivated and reach your English learning goals in the next part of our deep dive. You know, while we're on the topic of practice, did you know there are all sorts of fun ways to practice English online these days?
Online? Like what? I hadn't really thought about that.
Yeah. There are tons of websites and apps out there specifically designed for language learners.
Cool. So I could practice my English with people online.
Exactly. And you can actually meet other people who are learning English, too.
Oh, wow. So I could make
You're-
new friends and practice my English at the same time.
That's the idea. And it's really helpful because you can kind of create your own little online study group.
A study group, but with people from all over the world.
Exactly. It's a great way to stay motivated and, it's just more fun to learn with other people.
Yeah, for sure. I always feel kind of lonely when I'm studying by myself.
I get that. And on these websites and apps, you can, talk to people using your voice or even video chat.
Wow, so I could actually practice my speaking skills with real people.
Yep. And, if you don't feel ready to jump into a big group chat, you can also look for a language partner.
A language partner, what's that?
It's basically someone who speaks English fluently and wants to learn your native language.
Oh, I see. So we could help each other out.
Exactly. You can teach them your language and they can teach you English. It's a win-win.
That's such a cool idea. I've also heard about using movies and TV shows to learn English. Have you ever tried that?
Oh, yeah. Movies and TV shows are fantastic resources for language learners.
I love watching movies, but sometimes they talk so fast, it's hard to keep up.
I know what you mean. It can be overwhelming at first. But, you can always use subtitles at the beginning.
Yeah, that's true. But you said earlier that it's good to try watching without subtitles sometimes, too.
Right. Once you feel a little more comfortable, you can challenge yourself by turning the subtitles off.
Okay, I'll try that. Any tips for choosing movies or TV shows?
Well, I would say just pick something you enjoy.
So if I love comedies, I should watch comedies in English.
Absolutely. If you're having fun, you're more likely to stick with it.
That makes sense. What about music? Can I use music to learn English, too?
Of course. Music is another great tool. I mean, think about it. How many times have you learned the lyrics to an English song without even trying?
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's true. I catch myself singing along to English songs all the time.
Right. And it's actually super helpful for improving your pronunciation and getting a feel for the rhythm of the language.
That's so cool. So basically, I can just keep doing the things I love, just in English.
Pretty much. And on top of all that, there are also tons of websites and apps specifically designed to teach you English grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation.
Wow. There are so many options.
There really are. And the best part is you can learn online anytime, anywhere.
That's amazing. It's like having an English tutor in my pocket.
Exactly. And with all these online resources, you have no excuse not to practice.
Okay, so we talked about all the online resources, but I also want to ask you about reading. Because, everyone says reading is important for learning a language.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Reading is still one of the best ways to improve your English.
I know, but sometimes English books just seem so hard.
I understand. But, you don't have to jump into Shakespeare right away.
Uh-huh. Good point.
Start with easier books like comic books or children's books, or even those books that are specifically designed for English language learners.
Oh, like graded readers. I've seen those at the library.
Exactly. They use simpler language and grammar so it's easier to follow along.
Hmm, that's a good idea. What if I'm reading and I come across a word I don't know?
That's totally normal. You're not going to understand every single word when you start reading in English.
So what should I do? Should I look up every word in the dictionary?
Not necessarily. Sometimes you can guess the meaning of the word based on the context.
So I should try to figure it out on my own first.
Right. And if you're still not sure, then you can look it up.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm starting to see that there are actually so many fun ways to learn English.
There really are. And you know what's the most important thing to remember?
What's that?
Don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Ugh. But I hate making mistakes. It makes me feel so stupid.
I know it can be frustrating, but honestly, everyone makes mistakes when they're learning something new.
Even native English speakers.
Even native English speakers, mistakes are a natural part of the learning process.
I never thought of it that way.
It's true. Think of mistakes as stepping stones on your path to fluency.
Stepping stones. So like every time I make a mistake, I'm actually getting closer to my goal.
Exactly. And we'll talk about more important things to remember in the last part of our episode.
Okay, so we're back. And we've talked about tons of ways to practice English. Like we talked about watching movies and listening to music and finding language partners online and reading and all that good stuff.
Yeah, lots of different ways to practice.
But now what? Like what's the next step?
Well, now we need to talk about something really important, and that's your mindset.
Mindset. What do you mean by mindset?
I mean, the way you think about learning English. Because if you think it's too hard, or if you get discouraged easily, you might give up before you reach your goals.
Well, I mean, learning English are hard.
I know, it can feel that way sometimes. It's a challenge, for sure. But the good news is that you can actually change your thinking to make it easier.
Okay, how do I do that?
One of the biggest things is to stop being so afraid of making mistakes.
Oof. But I hate making mistakes. It's so embarrassing.
I know. But honestly, mistakes are a totally normal part of learning anything new.
So even native English speakers make mistakes.
Of course. Everyone makes mistakes. It's how we learn.
I guess that makes sense. But it's still hard not to feel bad when I mess up.
I hear you. But instead of seeing mistakes as something negative, try to think of them like a friend.
A friend?
Yeah. Like a friend who's trying to help you out. Because when you make a mistake, you learn what not to do next time.
Oh, I never thought about it like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I should be, like, happy when I make mistakes.
Well, not necessarily happy, but definitely don't be afraid of them.
Okay, just have to remember that. So not being afraid of mistakes. That's one way to improve my mindset. What else can I do?
Be patient.
Patient.
Yeah. You have to be patient with yourself. Learning English takes time. You can't expect to become fluent overnight.
But I want to speak English fluently like in Now W.
I know you do. And it's awesome to have goals. But it's important to remember that learning a language is a journey. It's a process. And you need to enjoy the process along the way.
So I should enjoy making mistakes. 80, be patient.
Exactly. And don't forget to celebrate all the little victories along the way. Like, did you learn a new word today? That's amazing. Celebrate that. Did you have a conversation in English and actually understand what the other person was saying? Awesome. Give yourself a high five.
I like celebrating. I can definitely do that. Okay. Any other advice for staying motivated and keeping that positive mindset?
Well, one thing that can really help is to remind yourself why you're learning English in the first place. Like, what are your goals? What do you want to be able to do with English?
That's a good question. I guess for me, I want to travel the world and actually be able to talk to people from different countries.
That's a fantastic goal. And it's something you can always come back to when you're feeling discouraged. Just picture yourself traveling the world, chatting with people in English, making new friends, having amazing experiences.
Wow. Yeah, just thinking about it makes me feel excited to keep learning.
Right. Learning English really does open up so many doors. You can connect with people from all over the world. You can read books and watch movies in their original language. It's like a whole new world of possibilities.
I love that. A whole new world. I'm ready to explore it.
That's the spirit. Just remember to keep practicing, be patient, and have fun.
Awesome advice. Thanks for sharing all these tips.
Of course. It's been my pleasure.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive on learning English. We hope you learned some helpful tips and feel inspired to keep practicing. Remember, be patient, celebrate your successes, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. And most importantly, have fun.